Patekar, who is moderating this session with Miss Malthi. Malthi is, and I will just, hand it over to Kaustubh to talk about it more and how is it going. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vibhor. Hi, this is Kaustubh Patekar. Our next presenter is Malthi. She is the head of product management at Societe Generale. And, right after the session from Ram, which talked about, how do you innovate or how do you reinvent yourself as a company? I think we have a great follow-up session from her because she's reinvented herself throughout her career. She started as a VB developer, then she became an SAP programmer, then she was project manager for a bit, and she hated it, and then she became product manager, and she hasn't looked back. And she's also uniquely skilled to be doing this session, which talks about enterprise and consumer products. What skills are common versus what are different. As she has led products in the B2B space at companies like SAP with tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And she's also led products for companies like Intuit with a product like TurboTax, which has millions of users. So over to you, Malthi. Look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Kaustubh, for the introduction. I believe all of you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that was, thank you, Kaustubh, for the introduction. And that was a wonderful keynote from Ram, which definitely touches upon the challenges that we have today and why it is so important to continue to innovate, to stay in the game, and how we continue to look for opportunities. And having, kind of just taking a leaf out of there, I think we being product managers are kind of really, really uniquely positioned because we are there at the sweet spot of technology, marketing, customer, and there is a lot of times product managers are actually called mini CEOs, where we can always look for these kind of opportunities, these kind of next set of disruption that will help us to take our organizations or our startups, with the next wave. Okay, so this is basically just an introduction slide. It is awesome to be doing a virtual PCamp, and it has been a fantastic journey as India Productified, getting started on this journey with some of the esteemed colleagues in the organizing team. So this is just a quick snapshot of what Kaustubh already talked about. And probably the one key point which I really want to highlight here was back in 2015, when I moved from a completely enterprise space where I was, I think, handling about 2,000 customers, generating almost the same kind of revenue, and I moved on to a product which had almost 5 million users and almost getting the similar kind of revenue, and just the dynamics. It was a pretty steep learning curve for me when I transitioned from a pure play large enterprise product manager to a small and medium and pure consumer product manager. And I will touch upon a bunch of those things which talks about volume of customers, the speed to deliver, completely changing your focus from qualitative insights to being data driven. And one of the biggest things is to be able to continue to experiment and learn and iterate, right? So I kind of touch upon that. So just to set the context, these are just some examples of the various products that we have on B2B. B2B is a product which is looking to solve a business problem, something to do primarily with a business process. And of course, we have different sizes of organization and enterprises over there. And whereas when we talk about B2C, we are actually thinking about a consumer, or rather specifically a user whose pain points we are looking to solve. And on the last side is where we have some of the product which are kind of on the cusp of enterprises on one side and the consumers on the one side. And it is beautiful to see that how do they segregate the features available for each of the groups and continue to build as a complete seamless platform. All right, so So does really things change when you really when you are a B2B product manager versus when you are a B2C product manager? So what I would like to say is that the first principles of a product manager, which talks about customer empathy, being passionate about it, problem solving, none of that changes. So ultimately, you are looking to build something that your customers love, whether it is a business user or it is a end consumer, right? The only thing that changes is basically the tools, whether you're doing it with a screwdriver or you really need a big saw to do that. So it is basically just the tools and methodologies, the kind of frameworks that you adopt that leads you to find more deeper problems for your customers and the way to solve that. Right. So I'll just kind of touch upon a few points, given we do not have a lot of time to go about it. I will touch upon some of the very key aspects. So um, typically when you are, let's say, downloading a consumer product, let's say Uber, or these days we talked about Zoom, that is the very, a lot of many of us are kind of downloading that product. Now, all it takes me is go to the app store, download it, and boom, I'm kind of get ready to start it. It allows me to log in through using my Google account or a Facebook account, or lets me create it. That means I need to create a product which is, I do not have to provide training material. It should be just ease of use should be so easy that I get started. And then I see, okay, a lot of customers downloaded it, but probably people are not going beyond that. People are not using it. So that's what we talk about, behaviors and patterns, wherein the focus in consumer is what I talked right now all about. Whereas when you look at a enterprise product, it would be more in terms of, are the process running properly? Is the workflow moving from X user to Y users? The controls that we have, are they happening correctly? Then the other thing I talked about is volume. As I said, from my own experience, I moved from a customer base of 2,000 to 5 million. That is the other thing. The third important thing for a B2B versus a B2C is that primarily the people who are procuring the product would be people from sourcing. They would be the people who will be, talking to your account manager. They will not be your end business user. So somebody, if he's doing inventory management, let's say, for example, if somebody is doing stock keeping, they are not the one who initially will come, who will be involved in the discussion. So your buyer is not the user. And a very important aspect between a B2B and a B2C is that a lot of discussions that happen is actually based on relationships. So for example, if you are talking about oil and gas, you have a Shell, you have a Indian Oil. These are big players, right, who basically determine that, okay, what new regulations are to come, what are the kind of checkpoints that we want to have, what are the controls. So a lot of features are developed based on these relationships. A lot of selling happens on relationships, whereas in case of B2C, it is very data driven. So these are like very key differences that we have between a B2B and a B2C product. What I have tried to just touch upon is that some of the key skill set that a product manager needs to have versus what are some of the tools that would help them. So for example, I remember when I started to work on my first product as a product manager, there were no B2B SaaS products. And that was the time when we started to have Salesforce. And then organizations realized, oh, we need to move from being as a thick desktop client to be able to open on browsers. And that is how the B2B SaaS products started to come on. If I have to take an example of a non-software products, even 5 years back, we did not have co-working spaces. It is when we saw an opportunity that, oh, there are so many startups which are coming up. So there need to be a place where they can be stationed. They probably don't need to do an upfront investment on their real estate. That is how the co-working spaces. So that's again kind of tying back, that why it is really, really important to disrupt and seize the opportunity. And in B2B space, industry expertise or the domain knowledge goes a really long way in doing that. So for example, if you're working on a product which is related to do inventory management, account keeping, you just can, or let's say tax product, you really need to build your expertise and know the domain as much as you need to know to run your product successfully. Of course, there are always SMEs which are available, but domain expertise is a very, very critical knowledge for a B2B product manager. The other aspect that I want to kind of touch upon, which is very critical, is that in a B2B product, you need to kind of learn and iterate before the product is kind of, you start building the product. As much as possible, do your usability test, go to your customer councils for feedbacks. So for example, when we were building some of the industry solutions, we actually started to think about, oh, we want to build 7 industry solutions. Then we went and asked our customer councils, is there so much of market? Is there so much of appetite? Do we have so much of need to have industry solutions for all these 7? And then we eventually narrowed down to 3 products, right? Listen to your support tickets, which is really important to learn and iterate. But usually this happens before you kind of deploy building your products. Whereas B2C actually gives you that lever where you can actually build your hypothesis. For example, let's say Zoom scaled up and they saw that, okay, more than half of the calls which are happening people are getting dropped out. So that means there is a problem that they do. That is when they kind of go back and look at the data, they do the funnel analysis. So being analytical is a very, very critical tool, critical aspect, a skill set which is needed for a B2C product.
Hello. Looks like Malthi has dropped off. We'll just give it a minute before she comes back. She looks offline at this moment.
I think we are experiencing the joy of remote connection.
Looks like. Let's give it a minute, else well. Sorry, guys. The Maltese just got offline. She's trying to log in again. Let's just give her a minute, uh, and uh, and we'll continue.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can, Malti.
Okay, sorry about that. My laptop just crashed. Let me know if you're able to see my screen.
We can see your screen. Just a sec. Sorry, just a sec. Let me just.
I think you need to.
Yeah, please. You can reshare your screen, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just doing that. Is it visible now?
Absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay, all right. Okay, sorry about the break. I had a system restart unplanned. Okay, so yeah, so key messages. The focus is a lot on the data part and the analytical ability. So I go on to my next slide. Okay. Okay, then the probably I'll quickly skim through some of the other things. As the other key differentiation is that when we gather the requirements, doing the prioritization is a very critical element in a enterprise these things, because you have some of the high value customers who basically demand. So how do you manage? Should you build something for these high value customers? Should you build something for your whole of the customers? Your CEO wants you to do that. So how do you manage to do the prioritization? And when you talk about customer care, again, having worked in something like QuickBooks and TurboTax, which are seasonal products, there is a time when you really need, like, thousands of people supporting your customer care. Whereas if you look at some of the B2C product, they don't even have people sitting and supporting unless you have gone through the cycle of raising a ticket, online, self-help, email touch point, and only then you actually get to talk to a customer care executive. So what are some of the key skills I would say is that, first of all, when I talk about the B2C product, for example, one of the opportunity I really want to talk about is that customers are very sensitive when they are working on their taxes, right? So, and there are a lot of times, especially when you are doing it yourself, you need support. So there was a feature, for example, that we introduced, something called a smart look, right? Which was basically the customer is able to see the support person. The support person cannot see; they can just see the screen. So that gives such a uh, what do I say, support or encouragement to the customer, saying that, hey, somebody's there doing the taxes with me. They are helping it up, and that really helped the product NPS to go up. Right. The other aspect is that in a B2C product is that when you are building something, you really want to get your MVP out. What is that I want to build? What is that I don't want to build? How do you decide that? For example, if I talk about payments, there are so many companies which actually provide these third-party payment plugins, right? So you probably want to focus on, let's say, your shopping experience. You want to focus on your login experience rather than focusing on payment, which is probably um, uh, something which is just available off the shelf. So those are some of the key things on a B2C side, whereas on a B2B side, there are, when you are talking about, again, a large enterprises or a SMB, probably I really want to talk about large enterprises, where whether it is something that you want to build as a common product or you want to do it as a custom development only for that particular customers. So those would be some of the questions which you never get to see in B2C but will come in B2B. And again, prioritization is very qualitative. You should not disrupt the process which is happening. So you bundle this in, release cycles which are not as frequent in a B2C, where you probably ship something every 2 weeks. That doesn't happen in a B2B setup. Quickly going on to the next part is basically the sales and marketing, and what is the price that a customer is willing to pay me. For example, when you are working on a B2C product, you are never doing specific demos to a single customers. You are not generating sales support material or working on relationship with the account managers or the regional sales managers. Those are not things that are a priority in a B2C. But when you come to a B2B, it is one of the very important things. You really need to, for example, if SAP as a product, they have implementation partners like Accenture, Wipro. So they really need to enable their partner ecosystems. They really need to work with the OEMs, right? Which is not a focus for the B2C. But for a B2C, it is, let's say, for more marketing focused. So for example, I remember this, I read in one of the books, when PayPal, when they started to, be more present as in more consumers, they adopted the virality model. So the marketing focus is very different there. Price wars are very common. You will probably see today, Uber is giving you this kind of a discount voucher, and you will see um, Ola giving you another discount voucher. And the last part, which is again very critical from a monetization per se, is that typically for a B2B customers, it would be very, you'll have a service agreement, you will have support agreement. So the focus is more on value. You really don't look at should I give them in-app purchases. That doesn't really happen. But with B2C products, you are all the time looking what are the kind of ads I should show. How do I monetize these features? Should I focus on customer acquisition, retention? The metrics for a B2B product versus a B2C products are very different, right? So these are some of the skill set and focus area that a product managers should um, look at while building their product, some of the tools. And probably I want to close talking about other aspect is that which I think was also there in one of the subsequent session, is that design and user research is a very, very key element both in B2B as well as in B2C, but it is much more in depth in a B2C because you are actually playing with the customer's emotions, and retention is a major there, which is not subjected to a business process, right? So yeah, so that's, yeah. Sorry, I had to rush a few slides because of the challenges we had in between, but I'm happy to take questions now.
All right. Thank you, Malthi. I think the questions are rolling in. So I'd like to sneak in one of mine while they come in. So I think that's a great journey. And I think you talked quite a bit about sort of the transition and the differences between B2B product management and B2C. So, most of us are practitioners. So can you talk a little bit about how you evolved your thinking or you changed your mindset when you made that transition from B2B to working with consumer products?
Sure, I can talk about that. So I think one of the most important thing, Kaustubh, was that the volume, and one was the volume, just getting, because I think when you are working in a B2B space, you have your focus groups, you have customer councils, which gives you a very qualitative information, and you have a fair understanding of your customer persona. But when you are coming to a B2C product, there are like millions of customers. Then how do you kind of filter out the noise? That is very important. Number two, not to lose the sight of the key customer pain point which your product is solving. So complete understanding of your customer demographic was something which was very critical. And I think in my 90-day plan, the 30, 60, 90-day plan, that is how exactly I did. I think I took a lot of time to understand my customer, use the product myself, because it's like, eat your own dog food. I used the product myself, given it was a consumer product, to say how easy it is for me to onboard, easy to use. So that was one thing I did. The second thing is that, as I said, the stakeholders are very different. You are no more talking about account managers. You're talking more to marketing. You're talking more to the power users who are using your products. So stakeholders. The third thing is the rhythm of speed. Probably as a B2B, you get much more time to, curate your PRDs, look at your features and then filter them out. And over the next 3 months, you probably, but in a B2C space, you're releasing things very quickly. You're constantly making decisions much more faster. So that was another thing, was a muscle that I developed when I started to work on this. And of course, it takes a while to build that, but you need to really move fast. And the fourth aspect, which was very important, was that I started to use much more the design thinking methodologies, which I would use in my research as a user research, these things much more frequently for every features. If I would have done this differently, why customers are asking for that. So these were some key 3-4 things which I did.
Okay, that's great. So I think, certainly the speed is a critical element. I think listening a lot more and then following a design and discovery approach.
Yeah, and
So thanks
probably
for
the
sharing.
first part is also looking at the data. I mean, to
Of
start
course.
developing that data-driven decision making is again a very critical element, which is part of my first point.
Sure, sure. So another question is about, which applies to a lot of companies operating out of India, is, some of them are, when they are doing a B2B product and often selling to geographies outside of India, they happen to be a little bit removed from the customers. So how do you navigate that challenge? Because that's a very different situation compared to B2C, where, like you said, you could actually follow, you could test and use the product yourself, you could get out of your office and talk to people, but you don't have the same situation when you're dealing with large enterprises, especially if they happen to be outside of India. So can you talk a little bit about that as to how you dealt with that?
Yes. So I think primarily, I think most of my time, the products that I've handled have been a remote product manager. And now I think given the world is becoming much more virtual, those are some of the skill sets which are coming really handy. And I'm sure many of us are kind of using that. So, being closer to a customer is definitely, I mean, some of the challenges, some of the things that are must do is that yes, as much as you can plan, let's say 3 to 4 times in a year, meeting your customers, whether it is in terms of conferences, whether it is in terms of doing workshops, is it in terms of running your focus groups, customer councils. That is, so as much as we say that we do remote product management, we definitely need to also put in some face time. The second thing is that we need to really maximize the use of the channels wherein our customers are coming in, whether it is in terms of looking at Amazon reviews or whether it is looking at our customer care calls. So I would usually join in customer care calls every week as much as possible, and also expose my engineering teams and quality teams to participate in that, because this really helps to build on the customer empathy. We would involve in having a lot of customer interviews, as much remote, as much online as possible, so that we are actually talking to them as frequently as possible. So these were some of the things that helped us, that even if we are remote, we are still able to into the shoes of the customers, understand the pain point, and maintain the interactions and relationships. And of course, looking at the data constantly looking at various dimensions, why something is happening, funnel analysis, deriving your insights, trying to identify if there is a problem. Those are some of the key things which helped to stay on top of our products.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I think continuously listening to customers, whether you are B2B, B2C, I think what you're saying is just the mode changes, but listening to customers becomes very important. Whether
Yes.
as long as you are a product manager, so that's great. Another question I'd like to leave you with is in the current crisis, what has changed for you? I mean, has it changed? Has it not changed at all? And how are you navigating that?
So personally for me, I think, as I said, that I mean, of course, I work with some of the startups, as also Ram talked about, with whom we kind of mentor, or I work with a lot of my team in Paris and other geographies. So if you ask me, business as usual has actually not changed much, because I think all of us are very used to being available on all the online channels as much as possible. So that has definitely not changed, but probably what has changed is definitely things have slowed down a little bit, where we are trying to see, okay, if I was looking to do automation of one big thing, can I really phase it down? Can I look at better way of doing things? Can I do the same thing in a slightly different way? As what Ram talked about, we need to look for innovate and look for opportunity given the kind of constraints that we have put in. So those are actually some of the things which for me, and of course my team as well, we are constantly looking at that. How do we change our strategies? What are the new other things that we want to work on, and relooking at our priorities.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. Vibhor, do you have a question from your end? Hello. Okay.
Sorry. So hi, Kaustubh, Malthi. I think this is presentation. We see a lot of questions coming in, but one question that are that I would especially like to ask, and somebody pointed out that, do you think that the SaaS B2B products are blurring line between B2B and B2C? Because there is a lot of you know commonalities. So, for example, say Zoom can be used in as B2C as well as a B2B model.
So okay, if I just get just to make sure that I get the question is that do you see that with earlier we used to just have thick desktop clients or the legacy B2B products which were probably not online, and now we have a lot of B2B SaaS products. Do we see that as kind of a dividing between B2C and the legacy B2B? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, so I kind of see that it is just an extension of that, because probably 10 years back the kind of use cases, I mean, we did not probably even have let's say self-employed. For example, when Uber came in, when Airbnb came in, with that came up a new kind of market segment, which is the self-employed, where there could be people who are doing Uber part-time, or the cab drivers. So there is a new generation of those that segment has come in. So the way I see is that while with large enterprises and let's say medium enterprises, and with the globalization of the teams being spread across, even the typical B2B products like a Oracle or an SAP definitely have a huge SaaS presence, where scalability, deployment, and all the running a SaaS application is very, very critical. But at the same time, these smaller mushrooms of B2B SaaS products that we talk about have been able to cater to some of the new use cases, some of the new segments that have come in. So for example, Amazon on one side is taking helping suppliers to come in online, and on the other side they have the consumers, which basically connects, so what we call as the platform products, for example. So I see this more as a evolution chain.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. So, Kaustubh, I think we have, I think we have at least 20 plus questions, but in interest of time, we cannot take all. We cannot take them here. I would like to thank you for your presentation and sharing what you did.